Today, the goal is for you to learn a practical approach to grounded theory. I'll be giving you a set of actionable tools that you can use when you're analyzing and approaching your own research, with a specific focus on using the Delve qualitative analysis tool. You don't need any background on grounded theory, but it is helpful to have a general idea of what qualitative research and qualitative coding is. But this webinar is also great if you are already an expert on grounded theory and just want to brush up on your skills. So I want to mention that I will be showing a perspective on grounded theory, but it's not the only approach. It can be very intimidating to learn grounded theory because there's a lot of different approaches and versions of it. But today we're going to be focusing on a few specific things. We're going to focus on when you should use grounded theory. We'll talk about how to collect and analyze data, how to use the tools of grounded theory to analyze data and derive new concepts. And because our goal is to take a practical approach, I will be simplifying some terminology and language from the original grounded theory papers, and we're not going to cover the history and nuances of every version of grounded theory. Although if you are interested in that, I do highly recommend that after this webinar, you check out the original books and papers, which are from Glaser, Strauss, Corbin, and Charmaz. So we'll talk about what grounded theory is, when you should use it, what the benefits and limitations are. I'll show a high-level overview of how the entire process can work, and then I'll do a sample project demo, and we will end with a Q&A. Let's start with what grounded theory is. So grounded theory is a qualitative research method that enables you to derive new theories based on the iterative collection and analysis of real-world data. So there's some things that grounded theory is not. So you might be familiar with other research approaches where you come up with a hypothesis and then you try and prove or disprove it. For example, a non-grounded theory approach to research might be one where you come up with a hypothesis theory, such as all children want to learn. Then you'll go out and collect data and see whether or not your theory holds true. That would not be grounded theory. Instead, grounded theory is a process where you first collect and analyze your data and then derive your theory from that analysis. So in this example, you might go out and interview children and parents, and then from that data, you will derive your theory. Another thing that grounded theory is not is that it's also not a process where you collect data in one step, do data analysis in another big step, and then analyze it in a sequential manner. Instead, grounded theory is an iterative process where data collection and analysis happen in a cycle, and then from that, you derive your theory. All of this happens iteratively. So with grounded theory, theories are derived from real-world data, and then data collection and analysis happen iteratively in a cycle. So when should you consider using grounded theory? It is a great method if there is no existing theory that explains the phenomena that you're trying to study. Or even if there is an existing theory, that data might be incomplete. Perhaps that theory was derived from a group of participants that are different than the ones that you plan on researching. So if you decide to do grounded theory, you should consider the benefits and limitations. There's a lot of benefits. So first off, the findings really closely represent real-world settings. You usually use methods like in-depth interviews and observation, and you do that instead of other approaches in less natural settings, such as using research labs or doing focus groups. So your findings will more accurately represent the real world. And because your theory is derived from the data itself, the findings are very tightly connected to the data. Grounded theory primarily relies on collected data to determine that final outcome. It's also great for new discoveries. It is a very strong inductive method for discovering new theories. Since you don't go in with any preconceived hypothesis about the outcome, you instead allow the data that you collect to guide your analysis and theory creation, and that helps lead you to novel discoveries. There's also limitations though. So recruiting can be very difficult. Since you are continuously recruiting based on your analysis results, your recruiting criteria is not predefined. So it can be challenging to continuously find the right participants for your study. It can also be time-consuming to collect data because there's no way to know ahead of time how much data you need to collect. So you have to be very flexible with your time. And then analysis can also be challenging because the data analysis occurs on a rolling basis, and it involves making constant comparisons between different excerpts of data. It can be hard to keep track of all your comparisons and findings as you go. So for that reason, it can be incredibly helpful to use a qualitative data analysis software like Delve to help you stay organized during your analysis. So I'm going to walk through a high-level overview of what the end-to-end process can look like, and then we're going to slow it down and then talk more specifically about each step. There are two fundamental concepts to grounded theory. One is that data collection and analysis are cyclical. You continuously collect and analyze data in a cycle. The second is that you start with raw data, such as transcripts, and then you turn that data into a theory. That's how your theory becomes grounded in your data. Every time you do a round of data collection and analysis, the data takes a step closer towards becoming a theory. And in grounded theory, that data collection process is called theoretical sampling. You start off with your first round of data collection. In this round, you'll recruit a small group of people to begin with, but you should plan to recruit more later. You interview these people, get the data prepared, get transcripts, and then begin your analysis. The first step of analysis is called open coding, and that's when you take your transcripts and break them up into individual excerpts. You'll then group those excerpts together into codes. Once you do that, then you'll go back into the field and collect more data. Once you have more data, you'll then see how the new data that you collected compares with the codes that you have so far. You might find that new data contradicts your previous findings. Maybe you find more details on the codes. But the point of continuously doing more rounds of data collection is seeing how your codes and groupings change and evolve as you go. Eventually, you'll take those codes and group them together in a step called axial coding. You can think of it like finding the axes that connect codes together. And after grouping codes into categories, you go and collect more data. Now you're going to continue refining those codes and categories even more. And then once you have a set of categories, you'll then define one more category, which ties all your existing categories together in a step called selective coding. This core category becomes the basis for your final theory. So as you can see, grounded theory is a process where data collection and analysis happen in a cycle. With every round of that cycle, your raw data takes one step closer towards becoming your final grounded theory. All right, so that was a high-level overview. Now let's dive into an example of a demo project with Delve. So when I show this example, I want to share that the projects that I'm using, these are fictional transcripts, and the purpose of this is for demonstration. So the research results aren't a real research analysis, but the process should be one that you should be able to take into your grounded theory research. All right, so with grounded theory, the first step is that you collect data in a process called theoretical sampling. And this is going to be the first of many rounds. We're going to recruit a small group of people based off our initial research questions. You will be recruiting more later, so don't worry about recruiting the perfect group. For our example, let's say that our research question is, how did high schoolers in New York State adapt to learning during the pandemic? I'm going to make a decision and start by interviewing high school seniors from New York State. So I'm going to prepare that data by getting those interviews transcribed, and then I'm going to bring them into my software. So I'm going to be demonstrating Delve, so I'm switching tabs here. This is a project in Delve, which is web-based. And when I have my transcripts ready to go, I'm going to click on Get Started. And then I'm going to drag and drop my transcripts in there. I interviewed 3 high school seniors. And now these projects are here on the left-hand side. Then I can give this project a name. And there we go. So the next step in the process is to do open coding. Open coding is the process of breaking up your transcripts into individual snippets. And let me show you how that works in Delve. So I'm going to start off by creating a code by clicking here on the right-hand side, and I'm going to name it uncategorized. So what I'm going to do is go through each one of my transcripts and break it up into individual snippets. I do that by highlighting sections of text and then clicking on uncategorized. You can do this with multiple paragraphs at a time, clicking on uncategorized, or you can do it with a single sentence or even a phrase. So when you're doing this step of open coding, you can either do it line by line, where you code every single line of text in your entire transcript, or you can do it more selectively and code the sections that stand out to you. There's no right or wrong way. I normally take the approach where I'm a little more selective about what I am coding, but either way, you're going through the process of breaking up your transcript into individual snippets. And as you can see, once I've coded a number of these snippets, I can go to see details under uncategorized and see all those quotes now organized in one place. The next step in open coding is to do constant comparisons. So constant comparative method in grounded theory is when you're doing constant comparisons between different groups of data and slowly grouping them into a structure to formulate your theory. In open coding, you will be comparing snippets with snippets and then creating codes that connect them. So let me show you how that works. So now that I have everything in uncategorized, I'm going to click on snippets on the left-hand side. And this is where I can see all my quotes from the entire project that I've broken up into snippets. What I'm going to do is compare different snippets together. So for example, over here, Chi-Ming says, "It was stressful. There was a lot of anxiety in figuring out how to keep up with my grades." And then over here, Ben says, "It was really upsetting. I had a lot of anxiety about missing my last chance at the championships." So when I'm making a comparison between those 2 snippets, which are from different participants, I can see if there's any connection between the 2. So I'm noticing both of them are talking about the presence of anxiety in this experience. So if I want to connect these 2 with a code, I will create a code called anxiety. I will click on the snippet, code it with anxiety. I'm going to remove uncategorized since it's now categorized as anxiety. And now both of these codes, or both of these snippets, I mean, if I open up the page for anxiety, I see these grouped together. So I'm going to continue doing the same thing. Ben says, "I was really anxious and stressed because I was going for that scholarship." I see that's somewhat related to anxiety, so I'll add it over there. Anjana here says, "It was tough, just feeling more isolated. I was feeling more lonely." And then Ben here says, "It felt lonely not being able to see my teammates every day." So let me connect these 2 with loneliness. So I'm going to code that with loneliness, remove uncategorized. My tennis team practices were suspended and eventually canceled. My friend's birthday party got canceled. So these are kind of plans that were disrupted or canceled. So I'm going to call that disruptions. And now you can see disruptions connects those 2 quotes together. And I basically continuously go through this process and read more snippets. I felt more connected during this time since we could eat lunch or snacks together. I felt a little closer to my family since my parents started to work from home. So that's interesting because I'm seeing a connection there where there's a deeper feeling of connectivity, whereas some other people felt more lonely. So let me talk about the next step in grounded theory here, which is to capture memos. So analytical memos are a way that you can reflect on thoughts and contradictions during your analysis. When you're coding, since this is qualitative research, you're going to see a lot of contradictions. Maybe one participant experienced loneliness during a phenomenon while another one experienced connectivity during the same event. So you capture that in the form of memos, especially when these ideas don't fit neatly into a single clean code. So let's go back to my project here. And I was already observing somebody feeling more connected, whereas there were other people feeling more lonely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up loneliness, where Anjana and Ben were talking about feeling more lonely and isolated. And then I'm going to rename this code versus connectivity. And I'm going to write an analytical memo here to say some students felt more lonely while others felt more connected. So I've captured that contradiction in that code. And now I'm going to add these quotes related to connectivity to that code. So this code is a little more interesting now. And I have an analytical memo to explain that contradiction that I observed. All right. So now that I've done some coding and I've created some codes, connected different snippets together, can we form a theory yet? So do you think that we have a grounded theory based off what we've done so far? I can say that some high school students experience loneliness while some experience connectivity, but I don't really know if this holds true for other high school students in New York. And then I also don't know why some experience loneliness while others experience connectivity. I actually have more questions than answers, and I don't feel like I have enough information to be confident in my theory. So what I need to do is collect more data to both elaborate more on the concepts and see if these ideas hold true amongst other high school students. So before we collect more data, I want to describe what we're aiming for. How do we know once we're ready to formulate the theory? How much data do you need before you can feel confident? Well, you want to aim for the idea of theoretical saturation. Theoretical saturation is the point at which additional data does not teach you any more about your topic. So I will continue to interview more people, and every interview should teach me more about these codes, such as loneliness and connectivity. But once I've conducted enough interviews, I will reach a point where I don't learn any more. And every interview will start to simply confirm what I already know. That's the point at which I've saturated all I know about the topic, and I've reached theoretical saturation. At that point, I don't need to collect any more data, but reflecting back on our example project, we have not hit theoretical saturation yet. We need to do another round of recruiting via theoretical sampling. So let's go back. So we're back in the cycle now, and we're back to the data collection phase. We are now in round 2. Let's recruit more participants. Whereas in the first round of theoretical sampling, this was determined by our initial research questions, which, by the way, can change as you go in grounded theory. This round of recruiting is now going to be informed by what we learned so far in the data analysis. So let's reflect on that contradiction, where some students experience more loneliness while others experience more connectivity. Why is this the case? So this question can lead me in a number of different directions. If I ask the group of you here, you might have different ideas for who to recruit next. Maybe talk to more high school students, maybe high school students from different parts of the state, perhaps interview parents. But essentially, you use the data and analysis you have so far to guide you in this decision. So I'm going to make a decision here. It's not necessarily right or wrong decision, but this is my next step, and I will decide to recruit parents to see if I could find a clue as to why different students experienced shutdowns differently. So I'm going to go out and recruit parents, and specifically the parents of the students that I've interviewed so far. And I'm going to go ahead and bring those transcripts into Delve. But before I do that, because I have already interviewed students, I want to show how you can differentiate between this first and second round of interviews in the software. So there is a feature here called participant information. And what I'm going to do is add a descriptor so that I can say that these 3 interviews were from students, whereas the new ones are going to be from parents. So I created a descriptor. I'm going to assign this one, Anjana, as a student. Ben is a student. Chiming is a student. Now that I've done that, I'm going to bring in my new transcripts from parents. So I'll click on transcripts, drag and drop my interviews from parents. And once I do that, I can go to participant information and assign each one of them to be a parent. So now I have that extra metadata that I can use later in my analysis. So as you can see, each round of recruiting through theoretical sampling was defined by what I learned so far in my analysis. So now we're going to go back to open coding. I have a new set of data now. So I'm not going to be starting from scratch. And with this phase of open coding, I'm going to continue doing constant comparisons. I will be comparing the snippets in these new transcripts to the snippets and the codes that already exist. So let's do that same process I did before, where I go through each transcript from the parents and then assign it uncategorized. So this should feel familiar to you since we already did that with the other set of transcripts, but I'm going through, reading through, and coding the transcripts into uncategorized. And you can see details, and now these are all my quotes from the parents. All right, so let's do those constant comparisons, comparing the snippets of the parents to the snippets that we had from students and the codes that we derived from students. Okay, so we are now going back to the snippets page here. And since I want to just focus on coding the parents' snippets, I'm going to filter now. So role, which I added as a participant information, I'm going to filter by parent. So now I'm just looking at quotes from parents, and then filter again by uncategorized. So these are all the snippets that I want to now analyze. So let's read through these again. Anuj says, my job in healthcare really impacted our home life. Work was busy, very busy, and so stressful. So now I don't have to only compare this to other snippets from other parents. I can also compare the snippet to the codes that exist. So this seems related to anxiety, so I'm going to code this as anxiety and remove uncategorized. And I'm going to continue going along. Since my office shut down, I started to work from home for the first time. I got to spend so much more time with my kids. So this one seems related to connectivity, so I'm going to code it with connectivity versus loneliness, remove uncategorized. After being laid off from the library, I started to take remote gigs from home as a freelance writer. That meant I was home all day with my family. It was really the most time we spent together since Ben was a little baby. So this also seems related to connectivity. But I'm also observing that between these two quotes here, if I'm comparing these two snippets from Beverly and Chen, both of these are related to connectivity, but they also have some association with the type of work that they're doing and how they are working from home. So I'm going to make a new code to connect these two together and call it impact of parent careers. So I'm going to code it with that. I'm going to code Beverly's snippet in there as well. Now I've connected both of these snippets together by this code. I'm going to write a little note to myself here. Both Beverly and Chen started working from home and had more time to spend with family. So that's an analytical memo right there. So as you can see, this is very similar to the process I did in the first round, but I am taking the snippets I have from the parents, doing constant comparisons between snippets, but also comparing these snippets to the codes that already exist. So once I have a list of codes from multiple rounds of theoretical sampling and open coding with constant comparison, I can start the next step, which is axial coding. In axial coding, you're also doing constant comparisons, but you're comparing between different things. You're finding connections between codes now. You compare codes with codes, and now you're going to create categories that connect them. And this process of axial coding will raise more questions and highlight where you might have theoretical gaps. And when I say theoretical gap, that just means areas that you need to learn a little more about. So for the sake of time, I'm going to jump ahead and assume that we've done more rounds of theoretical sampling and open coding, and imagine we now have a big list of codes. I'm going to switch back to Delve. So here's my big list of codes. So whereas before we were comparing snippets to snippets to connect and created codes to connect them, let me show you how to compare codes with codes and create categories to connect those. So codes can be connected by their similarities, their differences, or by connections, such as causation. So I'm going to look for connections by comparing my notes on each code. Let me open my code book. So I'm going to click on my codes on the left-hand side. These are all my codes and all the analytical memos that I wrote. If I click into it, I can see all the quotes related to each one. And I'm going to start to see if I can see connections between different codes. So I can look at loneliness and connectivity, open it up, look at my notes, compare my quotes, and then let me compare that to impact of parents' jobs. So if I want to connect impact of parents' jobs with loneliness and connectivity, I'm going to go back to a transcript and create a category now. So I'm going to say parents' jobs impacted loneliness and connectivity. So that is my category. I make it the same way that I make codes, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag impact of parents' jobs underneath it, loneliness and connectivity underneath that. So now this category connects these two codes together, impact of parents' jobs and loneliness and connectivity. And then I can go ahead and see if there's anything else I can connect. So things like parents working from home, parents away at work. So these are different things that I can do to group things into categories. And then similarly, I'm going to look at my other codes as well. And I can go back to my code book, take a look to see if there's different ways that I can connect them. And maybe I want to create a category called, emotional reaction to disruptions. I can bring that under here. And then I can basically drag things underneath that. So things like no sports, socially isolated, income impact. So essentially you can see that I'm starting to create a structure where I have categories that are connecting codes underneath. I'm going to keep looking for connections between codes and grouping them together. These codes are now nested. And then when you do this, you want to continuously observe your categories and see how they continuously change as you collect more data and learn more. I'm starting to get more of a structure where axial codes are describing the links between the codes underneath them. I will keep checking for theoretical saturation. And theoretical saturation is the point at which any additional data you collect doesn't teach you any more about your topic. So if I haven't saturated these topics yet, I need to do even more theoretical sampling and I need to recruit more people. All right, so back to theoretical sampling. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip showing another round of theoretical sampling, but let's just assume we're skipping forward in time and we're getting closer to theoretical saturation. Now at this point, you're going to take that step called selective coding. Selective coding is when you connect all categories together with a core category. This is when you find connections between categories and you're deriving one core category to connect all of them. Compare categories with categories and create a core category that connects them. So this core category will become the central idea of your grounded theory. As a note, not all fields of thought within grounded theory agree that there should be selective coding because they don't think you should force a single core category if one doesn't arise naturally. But for the purpose of our example, I will demonstrate how to find a core category. So I'm going to look at all my codes and categories using my codebook on the left-hand menu. So here are all my categories here. Let me click on codes. And these are all my categories. If I expand this, I can see all my codes underneath them. But let's compare category with category and see if we can come up with a core category that connects all of these. I'm going to once again read my analytical memos. I will remind myself what those codes are underneath each one of them. And then I'm going to derive a core category. So I'm going to create a core category now, come back to codes. I'm going to call it loneliness and connectivity impacted by parents' careers and friendships, impacted friendship, or disrupted and impacted friendships. So that is my core category. Now I'm going to drag and drop my other categories underneath that. So I have another layer of structures here. And then I can even remove uncategorized because I don't need that one anymore. And as you can see, I now have one core category that connects all my other categories together. Now we're ready to write our theory. So we've done rounds and rounds of data collection and analysis. And let me just remind you of what we've done so far. We did a round of open coding where we broke transcripts up into individual snippets. We then compared snippets with snippets and created codes to connect them. We then compared codes with codes and created categories to connect codes together. And then lastly, we compared categories with categories and created a core category to connect those categories together. That core category now becomes your final grounded theory. So now we're going to talk about how to take your theory and bring that into your narrative to write your report. But as you can see, this core category represents the central idea of our grounded theory. It was derived directly from the data collected, from the very base level of snippets all the way up to codes, to categories, to core category, and now theory. So let's turn our codes into prose and narrative for our final research report. What we're going to do is look through our code book and then turn our codes and analytical memos and notes into the final narrative. With Delve, you can export this codebook as a Word document and then start building your paper around it. So there's an option where you can click on this icon, export codes as document. That's going to produce a Word document that looks like this. I'm pulling it together into Google Docs here so I can share it here. But here is our top level core category, the categories underneath, and all of the supporting quotes. So from here, you can start writing your theory and then use these quotes to back up your theory in your project. You can also have a separate document open on your computers and have these side by side so that you can then start writing your paper in one, but pull over quotes from this document right here. So the first line of my paper, for example, could read, students with parents that work from home experience more connectivity when school shut down, whereas those with parents that were away experienced more loneliness. And this was also impacted by how their friendships were disrupted in the pandemic. So that's how you start to write your theory. All right. So thank you so much.